See the red light.
Hello, everyone. It is February 2nd, 2022. So there are a lot of twos in the date. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I had shared it earlier and someone said, well, what is it? What's the significance? We will never have this date again. Like we will never have all these twos in a date in any event. Welcome to Cocktails and Pajamas. I'm Heidi Ferguson, and next to me is Fidesta Ramsey, and here we are. Thank you for joining us. Those of you who are joining live, and to those who might be joining later, we welcome you. So let's do a little bit of a check-in. Where am I? So I'm finding that I'm still really kind of at this, okay place. I'm not too high, I'm not too low, and it's the beginning of February, and a lot of times for me, I struggle in the month of February with some mental health, some depression, but so far, so good. And I also want to say that I believe for myself that because I've done a lot of emotional personal growth work, and I have cultivated some really supportive relationships, I'm less in fear if I do tend to get dark or whatnot. I really feel like that, not that it wouldn't happen, and it might not, but if it does, that I will have a really decent support system around me to help me through it, to pull me through it. Because for me, thankfully, it's never been a long-term kind of a thing. And I know for some people it is, and that I can't imagine what that might be like. And for those of you who do struggle, I want to just really strongly suggest and encourage that you get support in whatever means that is for you. But certainly please don't try to do it alone, because life's just hard enough as it is, and would be even harder trying to do this alone. Trying to think what's up for me. So we talk a lot about boundaries here, and recently someone really crossed boundaries with me, and I found myself in a place where I was having a hard time getting back to me, and I was really triggered, and I just thought, screw you, and so I've confronted the situation, and they're aware of it, and but I'm sharing this because I feel like my bandwidth at times is pretty wide and I have a high tolerance for certain things, and then there are things that I don't have a high tolerance for, and this is one of those things that I really don't have a lot of tolerance for. And I just thought, okay, you can share one or two things, but to share 5 or 6 about this topic, it's too much. Like I can't even, because at some point I kind of glaze over and I check out, and I'm not present in the conversation. And that I feel isn't fair to the person or fair to me. So to come back around, I just want to say, when you have a boundary that you have claimed for yourself, to certainly have your own back and to stand up for yourself, because if I had not stood up for myself, that person would never know. So yeah. So anyway, I'm here, and I'm checked in for now. And Ms. Fidesta, would you like to?
Oh, I just love that. I'm checked in for now. Right? It's like good enough for the moment. Yeah. And thank you for naming, given at least February in the Northern Hemisphere includes, suicide prevention and mental health and a slew of things because interdependent social mammals now stuck in a isolated period and in a cold, dark period. So just normalizing that we might feel blah, right? I can speak for myself, just even the last 2 days being like, meh, um, and my life is good, right? Like in terms of I get to do what I love to do. I'm actually enjoying the winter and still have stuff up in my life, right? So even just noticing yesterday and today being a little meh and being like, is this depression? Is this just today? Is it just Monday? Is it just Tuesday? And I'm going to say tracking myself, not like hawkishly, right? Not with a pathology in mind, but just okay, seeing you. You don't have to be at a high or a low. Maybe this is a normal part of the spectrum. And I feel like we shout self care at people so much. And what we also need is community care.
Yeah.
So, to your point, that you don't have to do it in a silo. And in fact, when you're really struggling, it might be very difficult to pull out of the quicksand on your own. So lean on the resilience of others, right? Reach out to a coach or someone you trust, a friend, an ally, a sibling, whoever you feel you could be transparent with. Because also shame is isolating. Right? So as long as we're holding it and keeping it inside and feeling like we're the only one experiencing it, we'll have no idea that there's other people who are also experiencing it and um, maybe the relief that that can provide, right? There's nothing wrong with you that life is hard and that sometimes life feels harder. And there doesn't have to be a whole reason or story behind it, just reaching out for support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like, woot woot on boundaries. And we've never really talked about boundary violations, which I think is
Oh,
so often where some of us flex our boundary muscle is once someone's come past our protective boundary, right? And making people aware that at least for like me personally, that's a boundary violation, right? It might not be for that person, or it might be for half the world and not half the other half.
mhm, mhm.
But I think it's important um, because we are interconnected, and if it's not working for you, giving the person the opportunity to course correct is a loving gesture.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm. I've been geeking out on attachment stuff today, so I'm just in my happy place. Many hours of taking in that information and chewing on it and being excited to then share it with clients and um, holding to some tenderness in my heart, just some stuff that is not mine to share, I guess, um, but holding some tenderness there and also feeling, I don't know what the right word is, but it's like a preparing to be quiet and dormant
Mm,
energy, even if it's just this week or next week, 2 weeks, but a sense of wanting to get quieter and a little more still in service to breakthroughs and in service to processing.
mhm.
Um, yeah, that's what's coming up for me. Not my norm because I do like to be pretty extroverted and expressive and there's a part of me that's wanting a little bit of this time, like time by the hearth.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that for sure. Kind of it has for me a hibernation kind of feel a little bit. Yeah, I really I can sink into that, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how have you been since our last check in? What has been an insight or a challenge that you've been experiencing?
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed in the last few weeks is that um, I have felt a closer connection, a tighter connection with my inner circle. So that's been really sweet. And what's even more interesting is that as I like that's where my focus is a lot of the time. That's where my heart is. And because of those two things, I feel like my awareness in general has been heightened. And so I don't know how it's all connected, but it is all connected because everything's connected. And it's not like I feel as if I need to figure out the straight line to this and that. It's not about that. I'm noticing more and feeling a lot of gratitude because of the fact that even though I'm feeling more and noticing more, I don't feel overwhelmed by it. I'm able to, I would even say, I probably would even use the word compartmentalize in a way that's healthy for me. Um, and be able to compartmentalize, not so that I put it away in a drawer, but compartmentalize it where I want to go back. It's accessible and I go back to it because it's it's information that I need or want. And and then to share that, to share what some of the information and some of my insights has been, it just feels different and it feels yummier and deeper um and more connected. So more connected within myself and more connected with my people. Um yeah. And yeah, so that's kind of what's been up for me. And as far as frustrations, just I would say the boundary thing was a pretty big frustration for me, um, because it's a boundary that's been tested before. And yeah, it's a boundary that's been tested before. And I'm like, really? Do I have to course correct again? Okay. All right, I'm gonna do it. And I get that sometimes people forget. Like I really do understand that, Uh and sometimes people just can't help themselves because they're excited about something or they're excited about information that I might not be excited about, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so some attunement, right?
Yeah.
Is this person up for this ever? Is this person up for this right now? Is this person up for this in this moment? Like some getting buy-in, I hear, be an antidote.
Hmm.
Hey, I want to share this thing with you I just heard about. Are you open to it? It's related to this.
Right.
Do you even have bandwidth for that? Right? Like getting curious. Yeah. And I love your amnesty too, that we're messy humans who will not always remember everyone's care instructions perfectly.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to happen. We're going to do that to each other. Yeah. I love that. I got to say something I really freaking love, which is compartmentalization often gets such a bad rap,
Mm.
right? Oh, my boyfriend always compartmentalizes our relationship, or like compartmentalizing as a shadow, as a way to avoid,
Hmm.
as a way to numb things.
Hmm.
And I think for the first time, I really heard compartmentalization as a resource,
Mm.
as a way to still move towards those things, but in a way that's digestible.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's really cool because I do
Oh,
think it gets a bad rap as like just an avoidance style.
right.
versus a here's how I'm going to project manage this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so let me add to that, because I feel like, throughout most of my life, especially, yeah, I mean, at least especially for the last 20 years, I've done a lot of compartmentalizing. And the reason that I've done it is because there are certain things that have to be attended to ASAP. And so there are other things that are secondary. They're not a priority, they're secondary. So I'll put them in a drawer, a metaphorical drawer, right? But I also know that at some point I have to come back to those things. Because if I don't come back to them consciously, unconsciously, they're going to slap me upside the head. Because everything, like every issue that we have in our lives, does need to be addressed, does need to be dealt with. And if we don't, at some point, it's going to come back in another shape or form. And so I think, I don't know that it was conscious, but I think I've always used it as a tool in that way. Um, yeah, because I don't think I've ever said to myself, okay, I did about this much work. I'm going to put it away for 20 years. Like it's just, it's not who I am. It's really not who I am. And I'd rather deal with my stuff than not deal, because we all know how that works out.
I love hearing this because I think for most of my life, everything in my life was like a big bowl of spaghetti. It was boundaryless. No,
Mm,
no waffle cone. I mean, no waffle little compartments. It was just like spaghetti, right? So everything pulled on everything, and it would be very overwhelming to me, obviously. And I think as I started coaching, in a session, they call it coach entanglement, which is when something's coming up for the client that might be something activating for me, might be something I haven't actually worked fully through, haven't metabolized. And it can't just show up now. It cannot take over a session because I am there in service of their breakthrough.
mhm,
So, my first compartmentalization practice was that's got to go in the later container, right? I see it, I get it, I will get back to it later today or at least with a coach in the week, but it's got to go into a little, I think of those Tupperwares you put in the top shelf in your closet. That's like, it's got to go in the later container because right now I'm here to serve. And that, it's interesting for me, that was the first time that I felt like I had a valid enough excuse to compartmentalize, right? I'm contributing here, can't deal with my stuff. And I don't think I've had that kind of boundary with myself previously. So just loving the value and honor of saying, hey, sometimes compartmentalizing is the key. Maybe just lessening the bad rep it gets. And maybe that's just in my own connotation, but that's my experience.
mhm. So I'm curious about something.
Mm-hmm.
So before you were compartmentalizing and you use the example of a bowl of spaghetti, how, I'm just curious how you do that. I just, I'm trying to imagine, and I think I would honestly, I would probably have a breakdown. Like I probably would, because I know what my bandwidth
Yeah.
is. So I'm curious.
Well, I can't say it was the most efficient method. I got a lot less done because I would hit a wall of overwhelm. Well, if this decision's connected to that, and then that has these dominoes drop, and then that affects this, which is also a strength of mine. I mean, I used that part of my brain as a career, right? If the CEO makes this choice, these are the 14 dominoes that fall, then these are the consequences because of that. I think it's a place I have a strength. But when it came to matters of the heart, and particularly healing things, modalities, then it was just like I blew a circuit and nothing got done. So I guess it's been in process, but I only feel really solid now because I had to really do that in my acts of service. Um, but I think I spent a lot of time in overwhelm and in meltdowns because to have no boundaries between your worlds and between the outside world and what's yours and what you have control over, or whether it's a war over there, I think that's the empath curse. If we don't know how to have protective boundaries and containing boundaries, like here's me, here's the world, um, I think that's where some mental health, particularly for highly sensitive people, comes in, because it's a skill, and it's not a skill they're teaching us in school because they're not really like celebrating the introvert, the empath, the needs of a group of people who can be overwhelmed by all of it, right? Because we're like tuned in, right? So, yeah, how I did it, I don't know, but not well. And this feels more mature, feels more healthy. And like you said, like it's a place where things can be returned to with a little bit more confidence that I can handle it, because it's not like, oh gosh, I'm pulling on one spaghetti string and what else is going to pull with it. It's like, nope, we're going into this one thing and being boundaried. I mean, that's the word. It's like you're talking about the boundary with other, and I'm talking about the boundary with self there too.
Yeah. So not only boundaries with self, but also I know that I can only really focus on
Mm.
one thing at a time really well and be present for it.
Yeah.
And so if I have all my drawers open with all of the big issues that are happening, I'm first of all, I won't be focused and I won't be present for myself as I'm working on healing whatever that thing is that I'm working on healing. And for my healing process, it has to be all in. I
Mm-hmm.
have to be all in. All my tools have to be all in and present for me to do that work. I can't do it. I don't do anything in my life half-assed, or I just don't do it. I won't commit to it. And so certainly when it comes to healing my own stuff, I don't do it half-assed either. Um, so yeah, and I want to say too, that feels really hard to do it half-assed. Like how, so if it's only halfway done and you think, and you're like, okay, I don't want to deal with this anymore, but I'm going to tell myself that I'm done with it. That is another example of something that is going to come back and you're going to be faced with again and triggered by again until it's healed. And so, because I've heard people say, I want to speed this up. It's taking so long. And I get that. Trust me. I'm queen of wanting things to go really quickly because the pain is so hard. And it just doesn't work that way. You will really know when you're done healing and working on something. It's something I can't explain it, but I would say that it's intuitive and you will feel it within yourself when you know something really is finished and ready to be put to bed. Um, I kind of feel like I went on a little bit of tangent there, but I also felt like I looped around a little bit. So yeah.
No, totally makes sense. Yeah, just this idea of I'm still picturing it. The visual is so great of if you open all the drawers in your whole house,
Oh my God.
right? I feel like my instinct is literally to be like, I'm just going to go get ice cream out of the freezer because you're not set up for success if that's what you're doing. And yet I can own having done that for many years, just opening all the drawers, wanting to rush through it, wanting the pain to be over. and not realizing like it takes time to earn the wisdom of one drawer, right? It's almost like a craft, right? You don't just sit at the piano and all of a sudden know how to do all the songs that you love. Like it takes plink, this is a C, right? And
Yeah.
it's similar until we're like mastering our process for moving through things. Um, I love that. I love that, the wise adult is realistic. I think any place I've been in any kind of fantasy has not been the wise adult for me, right? It's been some young part that's like, oh, this should be easy. Oh, this should be quicker. It's like, who said? Like a romantic comedy? Hollywood? Like the people who don't talk about these things? Like, no. Anything worthwhile takes time. And becoming more realistic feels good to me. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, and feel free, to share as much or as little as you want. But I'm curious about your insights into you, just around what it felt like to name a boundary, to set a boundary, to deal with maybe the big awkward, to have the high five. I'm making this up, but like what parts of you came online to honor yourself there?
Well, so the boundary had already been established a while ago. And and this was not the first time it was crossed. And as this person was sharing and sharing more and sharing more, I just said, okay, you need to stop because I'm feeling overwhelmed and I cannot take any more information. And it was it was one of those situations where I don't even think this person realized that they were going on and on and on because they had shared one thing and then it just kind of was like diarrhea, you know. And I was like, oh my god, stop, 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 stop. In my head I'm doing this, right? And then finally I was just like, okay, I can't take any more in. And and then we talked about it. And one of the things we often talk about in our conversations is 5D living. And and to me, reporting is not 5D living. It's just reporting. It's information. And it's not necessarily information, depending on the topic. This specific topic is not information that I'm necessarily interested in. And that's okay. So I can take in a little bit, but only a little bit. And so this person, apologized and they said, thank you for saying something. And you realize that next time you can just stop me. And I'm like, we've had this conversation before. What? You know, um, and I don't want, and my intention is not to shame this person or make them feel badly. And there has to be an awareness. There has to be an awareness when a boundary is set to either a specific person or a group of people or whatever it is. It is the boundary that's being set for those said people. There has to be an awareness to that boundary, because without it, it just goes on deaf ears, and then kind of like it's almost as if nothing's been said. And the person who has set the boundary really feels disrespected, and that is never okay in my book, because when it comes to relationships, friendships, any sort of that thing, whatever we want to call it, um, yeah, trust and respect are for me, the two most important qualities when it comes to any kind of relationship.
Well, it's security enhancing,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And
yeah.
it's security promoting. And I love this, like it's a two-way street place, like where you're like, hey, if you violate that boundary, I'm going to make sure to let you know and share impact and have myself, right? Really be pro self there in a
Mm-hmm.
healthy way. And you shared care instructions clearly. And yeah, half of that, I think, responsibility is that the other person, to the best of their ability, remember, like, hey, it's not even awareness of your care instructions, awareness of themselves in the moment. Am I kind of hopped up on this? Has Heidi glazed over? Am I tracking that there's like contempt on her face? Whatever, right? I'm making this up,
Yeah,
but am I tracking in the moment this person?
yeah.
And then recognizing maybe where I like before they even say something that like something's off,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always had this fantasy, it's dissolving this week and in the recent weeks around if I told you my care instructions, you should just be able to adhere to them, right? That's the younger part of me that thinks like in the moment, WTF, like you've already been told about this, right? And what I'm learning too is if there are real boundaries that I have or real care instructions that I have and I need met, that I might have to say it dozens of times. And I'm talking about under stress,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think if every day that was the same violation, I just wouldn't be around that person. But if it's like under stress, we both do these weird things that are sucky to the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, I have to remind you again. That used to be very dissonant to me.
Yeah.
And now I'm realizing, yeah, actually, it's sort of like if I want that need to be met, I've got to help you have capacity to meet that need.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, how that become my responsibility? But it is.
Right.
But it is.
Yeah.
So thank you for naming that because it's both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know?
And I would say, in general, it probably happens more often than not. And it's unfortunate. And it doesn't have to be because thankfully, I have exercised and built this muscle, which is to speak up for myself and speak my truth. Um, and not everybody has. And that feels, like
Hard.
really hard, really hard. Um, yeah. And so I guess, I mean, I can certainly, pose the question to you, but I'm really curious to hear from our audience, for those who do struggle with that,
Mm-hmm.
like, how are they handling it or how are they not handling it? And maybe what kind of support might they need? Um,
And where are they growing their capacity, right? Because I think it's fluid. I think it's mutable. I certainly know times, and I'll use like the monologuer example,
yeah, yeah.
where I used to sit through it and get flooded and get like a little simmering to a boil and be like, how do they not know? And kind of get contemptuous and, but all quiet and under a very polite facade.
Hmm.
And now I'm getting better, though I'm learning with you, like more directness could be for those of us who are more literal and less like, oh, let me have some flowery words and have figured you out, right? I'm learning I could be even more direct. Like there's refinement
Hmm.
to it. But I remember the first time I practiced it, and it was when I was doing the Deeper Psychology of Intimate Relationships certification. And part of our practice was to flex that muscle of interrupting, setting a boundary. And I may have shared this with you, but I had gone to a friend's house. We had about an hour together, maybe an hour and 20 minutes. And she proceeded for like about an hour to talk about herself. And I didn't really realize that much time had passed, but at a certain point I did, and I got like a little scared that like I wouldn't get to share and we wouldn't get to connect and it would have been a one-sided thing. So about an hour in, she says, "How are you?" Okay, and mind you, this was a few years ago and I was braving it in terms of trying, even like just trying to do this because it felt so impolite and it felt so bold. And I said to her, I was like, wow, whew, I think I need to take like 10 breaths, maybe stretch a little, get a little, like a couple yoga moments in. I feel a little flooded. And it was messy, right? It's like we only have this much time. It's almost over. You shared for that, nearly an hour. And like now my head's kind of scrambled. Like I don't even know how I am to answer you. And she promptly shut down emotionally and she escorted me to her door and kicked me out. So that was my first experience. Yeah, we're not friends anymore, but that was my first experience of attempting to be honest and honest about my struggle,
Yeah.
that like I struggle when someone talks that long. I struggle to then know myself. I've become untethered somehow. And it was brutal. It was really hard. It was confusing because here I'd been taught a technique, but it's not foolproof because people are going to get triggered, right? And I was heartbroken because I thought, man, that was really vulnerable for me. And I got kicked out of a house for being honest. That was brutal. So I understand why people might cringe at trying that out.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, in the long run, like you said, I would rather someone else be upset with me than I being upset with me. Is that even grammatically correct? I don't want to be pissed at me because I got to deal with me all day. And I'm open to repairing with people if they're upset with me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a cost. And it feels like an insecure relationship when that happens.
For sure.
You know, um, I think a secure relationship can tolerate boundaries
Oh, yeah.
and be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which leads me to friendships, since we're there.
That was a really big.
Right? Like geeking out on the attachment stuff today, one of the things my teacher said was secure relationships don't tolerate disrespect, and insecure ones do.
Yeah.
And of course, disrespect, is a vague,
Yeah. Yeah.
like the values are going to be per person. But I found it really interesting because in my younger years, I would tolerate some disrespect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just don't have that in my world anymore. So it's hard to like retolerate.
Tolerate again? I don't know. Is it in the dictionary?
Yeah. So I'm going to throw this back over to you in terms of friendships, their value, how you hold that framework of what is a friendship to you and what matters. I think I know, but I'm always learning. So,
Sure. So as far as for me, core values in a friendship, I I would say I'm going to just say for me the three top priorities are trust, respect, and commitment. Like, are you committed to being in this? And there might need to be a conversation around that, because commitment to one person could be completely different, have a very different definition to another person. So And expectation, like in the commitment, what is expected of you? What's expected of me? What do I expect of myself in the relationship? So it's multifaceted, but I would say for me, those are the top three. Yeah.
I love that. And I love that it is a conversation, right? I mean, any relationship is a collaboration. So to think we're just going to like skip along, not having those conversations, again, I think is a fantasy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Like, are you up for this kind of friendship? Like, you know me where I'm like, I'm not going to be texting you 50 times a day. I don't like that stuff.
Yeah.
But you need me. We face, we'll find a time, that kind of a thing, to see each other.
Yeah.
Um, and then like, are we growth minded? That's a high value to me.
Right.
You know, I want to be around people who are forever students who are learning and growing because that helps me grow and learn too. And then I think loving communication, no matter how hard it gets, right?
Mm-hmm.
A place where we are gonna be like let's say I'm super mad at you for something. I still want to show up with like, I know you want the best for me. I know who you are. I know, like, I see you in a positive light. And this thing rubbed me the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that to me feels like safety.
Mm-hmm.
If someone was to give me feedback to be like, and I know your goodness and
Right.
you did this thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as I've said to you several times, especially in the last few weeks, I I need that directness, right? And you're like, because I don't remember the example exactly, and you're like, oh, but it just feels like too direct. And I'm like, for me, the more direct, the better, because that's the language that I learned growing up with a very direct mother. And
Mhm.
that's the language that I'm comfortable speaking. Although I will say, I have a lot more tact than my mother, thankfully. I've learned, I saw her example and I was like, okay, directness works and it can be done with some finesse, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, loving kindness and words, and it can be shared in a way that is received in a way that's loving, because we all
Yeah.
want to be spoken to that way, right?
Well, and I also think too, we sat there in a collaboration, right? It was like I
Sure.
could own, hey, I kind of sometimes say stuff a little cushioned, expecting people to get it because I'm having such intense feelings, right?
Right.
And you were able to say, and I can own, I don't hear that.
Mhm.
I hear this. Can you say it this way? Where I'm thinking, gosh, that's so bold. And you're like, but then I'll hear you. So it matters, right? What you were giving me was instructions on how to communicate my needs to you because you wanted to come through for me.
Right.
So it still feels like loving kindness at the end of the
Yeah.
day, right? And I want to share because Carlene's popping in here, which is wonderful. I think we were asking about like, how to have these conversations, and she wrote herself without rancor or hurting others,
Mm,
right? Like not hurting herself and not hurting others. And then she said, who can hear and respond? Who's safe? Because she wrote, it requires safety.
it does.
So that's a huge and a vital point. It's like, who can you do this with,
Yeah.
right? Who's going to be safe?
Right. And that's why for me, respect and trust and safety go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have one without the other.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, safety, absolutely.
And then cultivating it in those crunchy spots.
Oh,
Thanks, Carlene,
yeah.
by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being able to cultivate, okay, you could have bristled, right? You could have bristled and shown me the door, the Zoom door. I'm just messing around.
Yeah,
But
no, I know, but it's interesting because even as you say that, I know you're kidding. I can't imagine just like when someone brings themselves, like really brings themselves to the table and said, look, this is what I need, or I need a little more time, or can, whatever the situation is, I recognize vulnerability,
mm-hmm.
and I
Yeah.
respect vulnerability and authenticity. And so when someone is in that space, I want to be all receiving and loving, and yeah, and like, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's do it, because this is hard stuff, and we can do it anyway.
Yeah. Oh
Because
my gosh.
we've already built this nest of this safety nest. We have established this, and that's the foundation. So even though it's so hard, we can still bring it to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. What you said though, I'm just so moved by this place where like you can notice vulnerability.
Mm,
And it has me curious in those conflicts we get into in our lives that I've gotten into. Was I noticing the other person's vulnerability or not?
yeah.
Likely not, right? Especially if two people are posturing. If both people are getting big and loud and fighting, do you have any idea that underneath there's someone going, "Oh, this sucks so bad. I didn't want to get into this tonight," you know? No. It's
Yeah.
just like noticing vulnerability, welcoming it.
Hmm.
That feels like a huge presencing step to me.
Hmm.
However that comes. The sacred
Yeah.
pause, the really reading somebody. How does it show up for you that you're like, "Oh, this is vulnerability. This isn't a complaint."
Um, like, how do I recognize it?
And also, how do you show up that way?
Can you rephrase the question? I'm not really sure I understand that question.
Yeah. Yeah, you were saying like when I notice vulnerability, I want to be all receiving. And I'm curious, how do you notice it? How are you tracking
Oh,
if someone's being vulnerable?
um, well, the first thing that I would say is that I'm pretty clear when someone's speaking their truth. And when someone is speaking their truth, I know that there's more to be said. Like, they probably had a few, like maybe 5 or 6 words, and I'm like, oh, that's the jumping off point. Let's dive a little bit deeper and see what's happening here. Um, and and so not only do I want to dive deeper, but I'm really curious. Like, yeah, let's I because if I know that they're going to be truthful enough to ask or share these specific words, whatever the situation is, I'm more willing to do that too. And so I'm gauging myself, and I'm like, oh, how do I feel in this moment? This person is feeling really soft. Their words are soft, how they're coming to me. It doesn't feel like it's an easy thing to do, but they're doing it. And I'm really proud. Like, I'm really proud and pleased that they are coming to me in this way. They trust me. That's the thing. I feel trusted as a person when if the person on the other end is coming to me with their truth, I know that they trust me. And that's not, I can't say that's a common thing to really feel like you're the person who's being trusted. And for example, can I share, I'm not word for word, but your when we were texting around like an hour before, right? And
Sure.
you said, oh, can I have another half hour before we begin, because I didn't leave myself enough time. And I said, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. And thank you for asking, because I know this is something that you're working on. You're working on giving yourself enough time to feel
Mhm.
replenished before a phone call or before we do a CNP episode or whatever the situation is. And I love that. I really I respect you, because I'm seeing that you have respect for yourself to ask for what it is, to ask to have your
Mhm.
needs met.
Thank you.
Yes, and when I think about the world at large, I'm like, how much more healing would happen if people not only would ask for their needs and their desires to be met, but then on the receiving end, for people like, my heart is open. Ask for what you want, because I will give as much as I can to you. I'm here to receive your words and your needs. It's not a hard thing to do. I mean, it's hard. It might be a hard thing to ask for, but it's not. I mean, if we really,
Yeah.
at the basis of our humanity, if we really feel, if we genuinely love one another and ourselves, it really shouldn't be a hard thing.
Yeah, and sometimes it can be, right? Like I think of because we built this foundational safety and security with each other, it's become increasingly easier to grow into that, to develop that muscle. But I can say honestly, if it was a year or two ago and I had done whatever I'd done with my calendar, and I'd say, oh, like, well, I don't want to impact you because I scheduled things back to back. So I'm just going to show up a little winded, a little scattered, a little whatever, but I'm going to show up on time, right? It would have been immensely hard for me to ask for that extra 30 minutes thinking I'm impacting you, inconveniencing you, perhaps showing the vulnerability that I still, stack my calendar with things I'm enthusiastic about and haven't quite nailed the
Mhm.
transition time. But because I feel safe with you, it's like, yeah, I'm trying, I'm buffering between things, and I still need a little more today. And like, I don't feel bad about that. And if you say no, I'll still show up at the earlier time. But if I could have this, right, there's a self regard that's being built in the trust that if you can, you will. So that feels like a real huge safety net in friendship.
Yeah.
Like, if you can, you will. So I might as well ask.
Yeah. So
Um,
if I had had something scheduled for 5 o'clock, would have been 5 o'clock or five
yeah.
fifteen, I
Hmm.
would have said no, I can't do it. Um, but my evening is mostly open, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
let's be as. I think it's really important, especially because when we do this podcast, when we get off the call, for those of you who are listening, when we end the call and we hit stop recording, we both just we both simultaneously are like, oh, because right, it's and the reason, I think I will speak for myself, the reason I'm like, oh, is because it for me, it takes a lot of energy
Mhm.
to keep the conversation going, and to keep it as authentic as and to keep the balance between the two of us, so we're both equally talking and sharing and whatnot, and staying present, like really being
Yeah.
present and in the moment, so that I can I can be in the conversation, right? Otherwise, I would, if I
Yeah.
didn't, I would glaze over and probably start snoring or something. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but that, really. So yeah, yeah, I mean, I'm always glad to show up, and I know that I'm committed to it.
Yeah. And there's
I'm
effort.
committed to it. Yeah. And if I need a little more time, I'll ask for a little more time, because we really both want to be as present and as 100%
Mhm.
committed to it as we can.
Yeah. And I think you just bring up this beautiful point that, like, we are trying to consider each other, right? We're considering the balance, we're considering maybe the flow with each other, and that's relationship,
Yeah.
right? Relationship is, I'm going to say, a thriving kind of relationship does require some presence, attuned, curiosity, openness, consideration, care. That's the work,
Hmm.
right? Um, yeah, I just keep coming back to that as well, of course, right? Any fantasy that it's going to be flippant and casual and not well thought out doesn't seem realistic, right? I mean, on a level, we are going wherever we feel called,
Yeah.
right? There's flow. But on another level, we're tracking each other and ourselves.
Sure.
All
Sure.
those elements happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
And tracking time.
And tracking time.
It's
It's
about that time.
about the time for chat talk question. All right. I love this question. Okay. What do you think is the most awe-inspiring thing in the natural world?
Mm. For me, I think the human heart, and I don't mean the like aorta level stuff. Um, I mean the human heart that fuels the human spirit,
Mm,
the resilience of it, the unfathomable love that can be held in that heart, um, the unbearable grief that can be held in that heart, the honest work of healing. Like, I am just astounded by the human heart, um, in everyone that I
mm,
meet. Like, what I get to do as, my vocation vacation is sit with people's hearts
mm,
and look around together and make a plan together. And so I'm getting a really, I don't know, VIP seat, I feel, into the human spirit and just how fucking incredible it is.
mm.
Um, yeah, and if I had to pick a real landmass, I'd say Niagara Falls, but I'm going to stick with the human heart.
Okay. Yeah. Mm, mm. Um, so I have two, and the one is space, outer space. And when I think of outer space, I think of the universe, and I don't even have enough words to talk about it because it is so vast and so awe-inspiring. And I'm like, wow, that's just an incredible, it's an incredible thing. Like the universe and space as a whole is an incredible thing. And then the other, like when I think about mammals and animals and whatnot, I just saw this short video a couple days ago about the blue whale and how it's coming back into it's I think it's out of extinction mode and it's coming back into whatever the opposite of that is after like 40 years or something. Like it's been a long time. Yeah. So it's the, you know, that species is healing, which is great. And the blue whale is the largest mammal on Earth. And I forget, like, there were all these stats comparing it to it's as big as this amount of elephants. And I'm like, what? And it weighs this much, and I'm just like, oh my God. Yeah, it was really something. And there was this, the video that I saw was this little fishing boat and this whale just kind of swimming beside it and then underneath it. And I'm like, it was so beautiful and my mind was blown. I was like, that was created. Like that mammal was created. How great is that? Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, there are a lot of things that I'm awe-inspired, but yeah.
I love that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I feel the awe and the fascination from you, stirring the awe and the fascination in me. It's really cool.
Mhm. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, friend.
Thank you, friend. This is another lovely hour of our podcast, and thank you for those of you who had an opportunity to see it, who might see it later. Uh, we welcome your comments, your questions, whatever it is you want to respond to. We welcome it all. And
Yeah.
have a great weekend, which is coming up. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah. And I just want to give a shout out to Carlene because I'm seeing her comments already
Oh, good. I can't wait
in
to
the
read
live.
them.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. And yeah, if you guys ever have any questions, please just post a comment. If you need support, post a comment. Like we're checking that stuff out, and we're happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.